After age 80, life begins to speak in quieter tones, and sometimes we only hear it when the noise of everything else fades. If you're watching this, you may have already felt some of these shifts, subtle changes in your health, your energy, your circle of friends, or even how often someone says your name. But no one truly prepares us for these things. We are told to age gracefully, to stay healthy, to be wise. But what happens when grace meets fragility, when wisdom meets silence? This video is not about fear or decline. It's about understanding. It's about reclaiming presence, even in moments when the world grows quieter around you. I'll be sharing 5 truths, 5 honest, sometimes difficult realities that every senior deserves to know. These are not medical warnings or dramatic confessions. They are the kind of realizations that come after years of living, realizations that, once named, can bring peace, strength, and even a new sense of purpose. If any of this resonates with you, I invite you to stay with me. Type "I'm here" in the comments if you've ever felt overlooked or unseen. Subscribe if you believe that life still has wisdom to offer, especially now. Because this journey doesn't end at 80, it deepens, and you are not walking it alone. Sometimes the first real shift after 80 doesn't come with a loud warning. It arrives quietly, in the smallest discomfort, in a bruise that stays longer than it should, or in a simple stumble that doesn't go away with rest like it once did. What used to be minor, an extra hour in the garden, a missed glass of water, a skipped meal, now carries weight. Not because you are weaker, but because the body has changed in ways that feel both invisible and undeniable. Your system, once dependable and resilient, begins to ask for more care, more consistency, more attention to detail. There's a kind of grief in this realization. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a subtle sadness in understanding that your body now needs you to listen more closely, to slow down, not out of defeat, but out of respect. I remember the first time I noticed this myself. I had skipped lunch while waiting at a long appointment, thinking I could simply eat later as I always had. But by the time I got home, the dizziness came fast, and it stayed with me for the rest of the evening. It wasn't a crisis, but it was a clear sign. Things were no longer automatic. And while that might feel discouraging, it's also a quiet invitation to live differently, with more intention, more kindness toward yourself. Because this stage of life isn't about pushing harder, it's about adjusting wisely. You begin to recognize how even small disruptions in your routine can ripple through your energy, your focus, even your sleep. And in that realization, you learn that true strength now lies not in resistance but in preparation. Having an extra bottle of water by your chair, remembering to snack even if you're not hungry, pacing your steps even on good days, these small actions are no longer overcautious. They are wise. They are what self-respect looks like after 80. You may have once powered through illness, worked through fatigue, and brushed off injuries like dust. But now, gentleness is your strongest strategy. That doesn't mean giving in, it means showing up for yourself in a deeper, more deliberate way. And in doing so, you stop seeing fragility as a flaw. You begin to see it as what it really is, a signal that your body, your life, your time, all deserve more presence and patience than ever before. Aging gracefully isn't about pretending. These things don't happen. It's about facing them with quiet courage and adjusting the way a captain adjusts his sails, not because the wind is gone, but because it's shifting direction. And if you learn to move with it, rather than against it, you may discover that peace even now lives in the pace you choose. Not in how fast you go, but in how carefully you honor your path forward. And as we begin to understand the quiet demands of our health, another reality gently reveals itself, one that is often harder to explain because it isn't about a single injury or diagnosis, but the way the body changes its rhythm without asking. Some days you wake up clear, steady, even hopeful, thinking perhaps today will be like before, full of little routines, calm energy, and a body that listens. Then the very next morning, your legs feel foreign, your balance feels off, or your hands seem slower, more unsure, as if you've stepped into a version of yourself that didn't give notice before arriving. This unpredictability doesn't just affect your movements, it seeps into your confidence. Suddenly, simple plans feel uncertain. You hesitate before reaching for the top shelf. You wonder if you should still attend the community gathering, even though you've always loved being there. It's not fear in the dramatic sense, it's caution born from experience. And while caution is wise, it can sometimes begin to reshape the edges of your independence. There's a grief in this, quiet but persistent, a sense that the body you've known for decades is now playing by rules it doesn't always share. But even here, there is power, not in control, but in adaptation. Because you learn that reliability may fade, but awareness can grow stronger, you begin to tune in more closely, to notice when a certain movement makes you dizzy, or when your energy feels off before lunch, or when your knees tell you it's time to rest before you thought you needed to. These aren't defeats. These are conversations with a body that now asks to be heard differently. It's in this noticing that you rediscover a form of strength that doesn't come from pushing through, but from listening in. Flexibility now becomes a quiet kind of mastery. You may plan a walk and change it midway. You may sit through a moment of unsteadiness without shame, and instead of seeing that as a loss, you begin to see it as wisdom in motion, an emotional resilience that carries you through the uncertain hours. If there's one truth I've had to learn in my own experience, it's that we don't stop being strong after 80. We just learn to carry our strength differently, not in our pace, but in our patience, not in how much we do, but in how kindly we move through what's possible today. Because every day your body shows up, however it shows up, is still a day that holds meaning. Even when it moves slower, even when it stumbles, even when it confuses you, you are still here, you are still adapting, and that quiet determination, that silent flexibility, that is what courage looks like now, not in conquering, but in continuing, with grace. As we begin to adjust to the shifting nature of our bodies, we may also start to notice another kind of quiet change, one that doesn't show up in a mirror or a blood test, but in the spaces between conversations. It's the gentle fading of connection, the slow thinning of our social world, not because we've chosen solitude, but because time has chosen it for us. Once, your week might have been filled with family dinners, birthdays, and spontaneous visits from friends just dropping by. But now, the phone rings less often. The calendar, once scribbled with notes and names, sits mostly blank. It's not that people no longer care. It's that life moves on around you, and often, without realizing it, they assume you're doing fine. And maybe you are, at least on the surface. You keep busy, you keep things tidy, you smile when asked how you're doing. But there's a difference between being alone and feeling left behind. And after 80, that difference becomes more apparent. You may find yourself recalling old conversations, not out of nostalgia, but simply to feel close to someone again. You speak aloud to yourself more than you used to, or you watch the same film 3 times in a week just to fill the silence. And still, you may hesitate to tell anyone that something feels missing because you don't want to burden them, or worse, confirm what the world already seems to assume, that your life is smaller now and less in need of attention. But that assumption couldn't be further from the truth. Human beings are built for connection, no matter the decade. And even after 80, the need to feel seen, heard, and included remains as real as ever. The grief that comes with fewer invitations or shorter conversations isn't about being needy. It's about being human. And in that awareness, you begin to see that it's not the number of people that matters now. It's the depth of the bond. One sincere conversation can mean more than a dozen empty check-ins. A neighbor's 5-minute hello on the porch can soften the loneliness of an entire afternoon. So instead of chasing after a past rhythm, you begin to create a new one. Perhaps slower, simpler, but still alive with warmth. Reaching out becomes a quiet act of strength. Calling an old friend without needing a reason, writing a letter just to say, "I'm thinking of you," or even finding connection through new ways. Online book groups, phone ministries, or volunteering in places where your wisdom is still deeply needed. You begin to rebuild your circle, not in width, but in depth. And in doing so, you remember that connection doesn't fade because you've aged. It fades only when we forget how much we still matter to one another. And the truth is, you still do. Quietly, fully, deeply, you matter. And your voice in someone's life might just be the one thing they needed to hear today. And while the fading of familiar voices is one kind of silence, there's another that stings in a different way. The silence that comes not from absence, but from being overlooked even when you are present. You may find yourself sitting at the table during a family gathering, listening closely, waiting for a pause in conversation to share a thought or memory, only to realize no one noticed you were trying to speak. Not because they don't love you, not because they don't value you, but because the world has grown louder, faster, and more focused on youth, and somewhere along the way, your voice became softer in the eyes of others, even if your heart and mind remain as vivid as ever. This quiet loss of visibility is not about attention, it's about acknowledgement. It's the subtle grief of realizing that your presence, once central, is now peripheral, that you've become someone people speak around rather than someone they speak with. This shift isn't dramatic, and perhaps that's why it hurts more. It's invisible to others but deeply felt by you. You begin to wonder if what you say still carries weight, or if your insight, born from decades of living, is now assumed outdated. But the truth is, your voice still holds wisdom, perhaps now more than ever. And even when others forget to slow down and listen, you can choose not to go silent. Because silence, when it comes from being unheard, becomes a quiet kind of erasure. You deserve more than that. You deserve space to speak your truth, your memories, your reflections. And that doesn't always mean raising your voice. It means standing in your presence with dignity. It means remembering that just because the world forgets to pause doesn't mean your story has ended. Sometimes the most powerful act is to continue speaking even when others don't immediately respond, to write down your experiences, to share them with someone younger, or to simply keep telling them to yourself, so that your life doesn't fade even if others aren't paying attention. This isn't about reclaiming a spotlight, it's about reclaiming identity. The person you've become over the years is still here, still watching, still learning, still offering depth that fast-moving voices often miss. And even when your wisdom is met with impatience or indifference, it doesn't lose its value. It only waits for the right ears, the right moment, the right heart to recognize it. So if lately you've felt invisible, not in body but in presence, know this: your worth has not changed. Your insight is not diminished. You are still needed, still seen, even if the world around you needs to slow down long enough to realize it. And perhaps your quiet strength, your steady patience, your enduring presence, that is exactly what this world in all its haste needs most. And as your voice quietly adjusts to a world that sometimes forgets to hear it, another change begins to unfold, not in the loud events or the milestones, but in the quiet routines that once gave rhythm to your days. Life after 80 often doesn't shrink all at once. It draws inward gently, almost without warning, like the tide pulling back from the shore. One day you realize you haven't been to your favorite cafe in weeks, not because you don't want to, but because getting there feels just a little too far, or because the friend you used to meet there no longer goes out much herself. The corner store closes, the church moves service times, the neighborhood begins to look different, not because it has changed overnight, but because the pieces you once recognized begin to disappear one by one. And with every small change, your world becomes quieter, more contained, more familiar, and yet somehow more distant. There's a particular kind of grief that comes with this, not a dramatic loss, but a slow mourning of familiarity, of routines that used to ground you. You might not even realize how much you miss certain things until you're standing at the window one afternoon, unsure of what to do with the hours that feel just a bit too long. And yet, this narrowing doesn't mean that life has lost its value. It simply means the shape of it has changed. Where once you found purpose in motion, now you may discover it in stillness. Where once joy came from going places, now it may come from noticing the light shifting across your living room floor or hearing the same cardinal visit your windowsill each morning. These may seem like small things to the outside world, but after 80, it's often the small things that begin to matter most. A phone call from someone you haven't spoken to in months, the smell of a favorite meal, a memory that returns, not to sadden you, but to remind you how deeply you've lived. And from that remembering comes renewal, not in the form of busier days, but in deeper presence. You start to see that meaning doesn't come from how wide your life reaches, but how fully you inhabit the space you still hold. That a day at home filled with intention, connection, and quiet beauty can be just as fulfilling as a day that once carried a full itinerary. You begin to build new rituals, watering a single plant, writing a journal entry each morning, sending a kind message to someone just because. And in doing so, your life begins to expand again, not in size but in soul. Because what aging gracefully truly means is not resisting the narrowing, but learning to fill the space you do have with light, with presence, with care. Even now, especially now, there is room for joy. And sometimes, it is in the smallest corners of your day that life whispers the loudest, reminding you that even a quiet life can still be deeply, beautifully alive. As we've gently explored together, life after 80 brings with it a quieter set of truths, ones that many feel, but few speak aloud. From the fragility of health to the silent shifts in connection, visibility, and purpose, these realities are not signs of failure or decline, but invitations to live with more awareness, more intention, and above all, more grace. You are not alone in these changes. Every wrinkle, every pause, every forgotten word carries with it a story worth honoring. If something in this video resonated with your experience, I encourage you to share it in the comments, because your voice, your journey, may be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Whether you face loneliness, changes in independence, or the quiet grief of shrinking routines, know that your wisdom still matters. Life after 80 is not about fading away. It's about discovering how much depth still lives in the present moment. And sometimes healing begins with simply being heard,